Believe it or not, myself having lived long enough to go from a teenager owning a car with a crank handle to today's keyless cars, and having lived long enough to go from telephone party lines to cell phones on your wrist, it's interesting to watch the progression of things over a period of time, like the frog in hot water. Some things progress for good, other things progress for bad. Now, without talking about the rights and wrongs, but here is a journey of society in my lifetime in relation to the gay community. Now, before you get upset, I want you to follow the journey and see what you think at the end. And where do you think it will end? How far do you want to go? And how far is too far for you? Here is what I have seen, and I know this was before some of you were even born, but back in the early 80s, believe it or not, and for me, that's not that long ago, homosexual activity was actually illegal in New Zealand, just as it was in many other Western countries. Interesting, back then, there was no such thing as LGBTQ, etc. There were pretty much, or known to be, just a few homosexuals and lesbians, obviously just a small number, and many would say, yes, they were in the closet. I can recall as a young person that the term queer was a very derogative term to use at someone. I can recall when the word gay meant to be jolly, and of course rainbows were in the sky. It is true that any boy who showed signs of queer behavior, he was given a hard time. Likewise back then, so were overweight kids, big ears. In fact, any kid that was different got a hard time. Sadly, bullying was very much part of the culture of growing up, and I hope that we've come a long way from that. Sadly, kids can be cruel to one another. It's interesting to note that although homosexuality was illegal, lesbianism was not. Whether it's true or not, but the story was told that Queen Victoria in 1885, who instituted the law outlawing homosexuality, could not believe that women would behave like that. Hence, it was only men engaging with sex with other men who were outlawed. Without digressing, can I just add that at times we fool ourselves that we live in a democracy. Sure, we may get to vote a government in every 3 years, and when politicians get into power, they actually seem to do whatever they like, irrespective of the will of the people. For example, when Parliament passed the anti-smacking bill in May 2007, 80% of the country were opposed to it. Likewise, in relation to the homosexual law reform, rightfully or wrongfully, 88% of the country at the time were opposed to it going through. At the time, it was the largest petition per head capita ever raised, over 800,000 signatures, with only a voting population of around 1.7, if I recall. Yet, disregarding that petition on the 11th of July 1986, the government legalized homosexuality for males above the age of 16. My point to this post is not about the fallacy of democracy. I know I did digress, as I believe it's important to note that we still see today the continued blatant legalization of laws against the will of the people. I also know that part of the problem is that today people are so divided over nearly every issue, which is causing society to sadly unravel as it seems. Back to the 80s. The argument from the gay community to get the legalization through was, what happens behind closed doors is nobody else's business. In other words, live and let live. Now, while we know things don't stay behind closed doors, things always come out, but that was their main debating point to the public. So, as mentioned in 1986, homosexuality became legal in New Zealand, just as it has now pretty much in every other Western country. We could still note that it is still illegal in many countries, around 64, many in Africa and the Middle East. Russia, of course, has recently reintroduced laws prohibiting the promotion of the gay community. Sadly, some of those countries even have the death penalty. It is also worthy of notice that those who favour such harsh laws are infiltrating other nations through immigration, such as in Europe. It may just be watch the space. It could be very tough days ahead for some. Along with what is known as a Christian infidel, it's worthy to note that in Muslim countries who on one hand are viciously against the gay community, they can legally have 2, 3 or 4 plus wives. Something that is also against the principles and values of the traditional Christian nations. It is again worthy to note that Israel, who many gay people are railing against today regarding the Gaza war, has the most liberalized gay rights in the Middle East. In fact, before the war, Israel was promoting Tel Aviv as the gay capital of the Middle East and the most gay-friendliest city in the world. Back to the progression that I've seen since my early days. 2004, here in New Zealand, the government legalised civil unions coming into law on the 26th of April 2005. The civil union law was put into place for gay couples and straight couples. The argument and the reason for civil unions was mainly over property rights. If the couple separated, civil unions was regarding the fair splitting of assets, etc. Of course, some could see that this was a hidden agenda to progress onto same-sex marriage. Even the parliamentary website today actually cites that. I recall Brian Tamaki leading Enough is Enough march in Wellington, pointing to the fact that civil unions would lead to gay marriage, but many rubbished him with that idea. And so 8 years after legalisation of civil unions on the 19th of August 2013, gay marriage was legalised here in New Zealand. Now the argument, the progression 2 and 4 was for same-sex marriage was, you may recall, it was all about love, that you should be free to marry whomever you love. It's fair to note that while that argument for marrying whoever you love may sound great and it can appeal to many, think about that for the argument of reasoning further. Some people around the world, on the basis of the argument of marriage for love, have married their cars, their pets, even their siblings, and even married themselves, to which I think most normal thinking gay or straight person would say that's a step too far. But can you have a law for one and not for another if it's on the basis of love? While the government legalised same-sex marriage, they noted that marriage celebrants did not have to perform the ceremony if it went against their beliefs. This has now changed, again progression, where all the independent celebrants have to be willing to conduct gay marriages, but celebrants who belong to churches still do not. Why is that? Well, it's true and fair to say that 99% of churches, in other words, every fully Bible-believing church, still believe that marriage is and should be only between a man and woman. Now, we did not write the book, but we have come to believe the book. I'm talking about the Bible. Many churches in our PC woke world, although believe it, yet they want to keep quiet about it, keep silent about it. In other words, they don't want to rock the boat. And sadly, it seems some are happy for the likes of Bethlehem College to take the flak for holding up their values and beliefs on marriage. At the same time, gay marriage was legalized, so was a passing of legislation that gay couples could adopt children on the basis or the argument that the modern family is no longer the traditional family. I won't talk about how there's abundance of evidence that children are better balanced in being brought up in the healthy traditional family unit with a mum and a dad. But that's not my point, and many may disagree or agree with the evidence. But you cannot disagree with the progression that I've seen in my 73 years so far. You know, I think about even babies through surrogacy and how far is too far. But to recap, progression. The argument that what happened behind closed doors was nobody else's business. The argument for property rights, for civil unions. The argument for being able to marry whom you love, for gay marriage. The argument that the traditional family is no longer the only family for the adoption of kids. No wonder they call the liberals the progressives. But please, we're getting to my point. Stay with me. Let's not stop here as we've seen further progression. I know that society has moved on from the homosexual law reform days, the civil union days, even more recent marriage and the adoption of children. Here we are today under the reign of progressivism, using or discussing the usage of bathrooms, changing rooms. We are now allowing biological boys in girls' changing sheds in their toilets. We're allowing men prisoners who identify as women to be imprisoned with women. Progressiveness. We are debating over the rights of biological males competing with other women at the highest level of sports and men playing in women's sports teams and against women. We have progressed from the simple days of homosexuality and lesbianism to where we have seen the evolvement, the progressiveness of the LGBTQ+++. They say there are now over 100 sexualities. In fact, one person stated, you can have any number of sexual orientations. It's endless. It says whatever you want to be or whatever you want to identify to be or whatever you think you are. Young people are getting so mixed up today, where, as you know, there are now kids known as furries. Kids going to school identifying as a cat. They purr, or they identify as a dog and bark away, whatever they identify with. Schools are even allowing litter boxes into the classrooms. I ask you, are we going too far? I have to ask even the most liberal, progressive person, have we progressed too far? And you need to watch part 1 to understand what I'm talking about. Here we are today, progressed into the transgender movement and the mutilation of young teenagers' bodies. Young kids who most normal thinking adults, I'm sure, would say are far too young to be making life-changing decisions. Yet some radicalized adults, school counselors, etc. are pushing these kids onto puberty blockers, binding, operations, removing breasts and penises from young people. Who wasn't a bit confused going through puberty, I might ask? But did you know England and other countries have come out now and banned these practices because they've seen the danger and the harm it causes? New Zealand, we had better wake up. I know that there are many in the gay community who are just as concerned as I am and upset with what is happening today, saying this was never what their movement was about. And as we have not progressed far enough today, we now even have the radicals blatantly, unashamedly waving the red flag at the bull, as it were, by singing, "We are coming for your children." I won't talk about drag queens reading to the children in public libraries at taxpayers' expense. Brian Tamaki again has done a great job at highlighting that. But if all the above is not far enough progression for you, there are people today who want to legalize pedophilia, bestiality, and other extreme sexual deviant behavior, all in the name of progression, all in the name of liberalization. You say that won't happen? Well, let's just go back 10 years, as I've mentioned to you. 10 years ago, would you have thought that boys would be in girls' changing rooms or young girls getting their breasts cut off? You would say the same thing. That would never happen. Hello, welcome to today. Welcome to reality. Progressiveness used to be a positive word, but like other words today, has come to mean something else. So can I ask you, where do you draw the line? I know you cannot legislate righteousness. That is something that has to be in people's hearts. But you do have to have limits on how far you go, or in this case, how far society goes. Like speed limits, we may not like them, for I know at times we've all broken those limits. Well, I have. So I'm not here to point the finger. People may be free to do what they want, to live how they want. But for the good of society, we do need boundaries. I close with what I happen to believe is a bigger issue for everyone, for all the progressiveness people out there. The truth and the reality is that we will all stand before God and give an account of our lives. Apart from our God-given conscience and moral compass, which is in the heart of every person, knowing what is right and wrong, I also know from experience that we can all sear our conscience. It's like when we first tell our first lie or steal something, we feel so bad deep down in our gut and our spirit. But if we continue to lie and steal whatever, we no longer feel guilty. In other words, we've seared our conscience. That's a dangerous place to be. Look at the horrendous things that people are doing in the world today. Many who have obviously seared their conscience and have opened up their lives to demonic forces, because that's the progression of it. We do have our Maker's book, the Bible, to tell us what is right and what is wrong, our moral compass. Now, we're all sinners. That is why Jesus came and died on the cross. And God is faithful and just to forgive us our sin and cleanse us from all our unrighteousness when we turn from sin and turn to Him. So I will leave you to read the book for yourself. But let's not progress ourselves over the cliff if we have not done that already.